What's going on, guys? This is Ramsay here with the PinPoint Players, and I'm joined here with my friend Tim.
Hey there, guys.
Today, we're back with another episode, and here we'll discuss High Score on Netflix, the second episode called Comeback Kid.
Quite an episode it was, if I can say so myself. It was beautifully done.
Oh yeah, so many good things that I learned for the first time. I mean, there were some more general details that I kind of been aware just like growing up as a gamer kid throughout the 90s, 2000s, but there were so many finer points that I just never knew, and we'll get into some of those, like, John Kirby definitely being one of them.
Oh, yeah. Sort of the unsung hero
Oh yeah,
of Nintendo.
100%. I mean, all 8-bit characters running around Tokyo definitely set the tone for the episode. It's like, okay, this is about Nintendo. Nintendo's the star of this show, or this episode, so for that, let's get going.
I do want to remind our PinPoint players, this documentary is available on Netflix. If you enjoy what we're listening to, head on down, listen to it, or listen to our podcast, watch the documentary, see if things sort of mesh with you as well. The documentary is called High Score, and it's really covering sort of the history about video games and sort of its emergence into our society today at large.
It covers quite a bit of history, and like I said, it covers a lot of small things. Like, I mean, the first episode, like, this is maybe a few minutes in, Hizaru Tanaka, I hope I'm saying his name right, he was a sound effect creator, and one of the things he kind of alluded to in his explanation was he made these sound cues for games, and these sounds in these games were especially crucial in very early games to let you know that you were doing something when you were going through a level. And that could be something like if you push the blaster button in Metroid to let you know that you fired the weapon, and then the door opening noise to let you know that, hey, the door is open, you can go through. These may sound trivial, but these little things were crucial in the early days of, 8-bit gaming, or even, hell, before that, when we were talking arcade or vector games.
Yeah, it was essentially very important for those things, but you never really thought about it. You enjoyed the game, the experience. It was so immersive because of all the fine details that Hirokazu Tanaka wrote his name down as well. Really liked his intro, the way that he kind of picked sounds just kind of out of everyday life. And what really sunk home for me was that the sounds didn't turn out the way that he intended them to. He says in the documentary that he made sounds, but the big example that he uses was in Donkey Kong's gameplay. Mario's steps sounded too cute, as he put it, but it was beautiful in the sense that it happened the way it did, and it potentially helped sell the game and make it as successful as it is today.
As Bob Ross would call it was a happy accident. And that happy
Good old
accident
Bob Ross
helped create the atmosphere when you were playing Donkey Kong, trying to rescue Peach, climbing those ladders, jumping over barrels, or in the Mario game itself when that came out on the Nintendo system, I think a couple years later. Like I said, this is only within the first 5 minutes, and so that's how you know that the quality of this is there. It tells you the story, and it tells you in a very kind of emotional way that makes it relatable, and I think even a non-gamer person, to an extent, I feel like would appreciate some of these nuances or some of these historical things.
Yeah, the building blocks of a video game. Going into it, learning about how things started, how things became the way they are now, interviewing the people who were there. I mean, the way they kind of casually just mention some certain people involved with Nintendo, Universal, is one thing I really want to talk about. When we get there, I'll let you know. But the sounds. I kind of alluded to how important sounds would be in the first episode, but as we were saying, this was all before the credits rolled to introduce the episode. This is the kind of stuff that we were being told, educated to, and I think that the quality of it is it's worth mentioning. I don't know. I feel like more people should be talking about it.
Absolutely. I mean, the media of the episode is very great, very interesting, but even those smaller things that people would just kind of see in the first couple minutes and then kind of gloss over to like the rest of the episode, these things definitely ought to be noticed as well because it's part of the history. Sometimes small and trivial as they might be, they're important because they were the building block. And just on a side note, watching the episode, I appreciated things like, I love the older artwork for video game ads or the box art itself. I feel like that's sorely missed. It's like, yes, there's video games still being sold with, nice box art. But I just like the vibrancy of the colors and the kind of the almost the comic book esque superheroification of the box art. I don't know.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
I feel like I'm not doing complete justice with the description, but I just had to say that it's different now, and it's not bad different. It's just different than what it was, and I'm a sucker for the old art style.
Oh no, I completely agree. With my, Pokemon, looking into that and all of it, the Pokemon box art for the first video game, the ones that were released in Japan, and then the ones that were released in the United States. It's funny, but I actually liked the box art for the United States versions that were released compared to the ones that were released in Japan, which a little portion of this episode actually dedicated a small spot to the advertising and how the conflicts between bringing a product over from Japan over to the United States and the difficulties that ensued. I'm actually really interested to hear that you preferred that kind of box art with the colors and the comic book esque style. Because this woman, I forget her name, but I have it written down. Gail Tilden.
Gail Tilden. I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like because the box art or just the artwork in general, I like both the American and the Japanese box art. But let me give you, I guess, a more specific example. There's a game I played as a kid with my brother. It was on the Sega Master System. Just to quickly off tangent, it was called Kanseiden. You're playing, I think, as a samurai going through like pseudo Japan, and you fight through enemies in different areas to get to the end of the game. But for me as a kid, besides the actual gameplay, the box art was special because very vibrant, very unique. Like you knew you were playing a very compelling game. And I mean, the biggest form of advertising for a kid back then, besides seeing a commercial, is if you're walking through a store and you're seeing this box art, you want this box art to be striking, you want it to be memorable, and you want it to grab your attention. And this was one of them that grabbed my attention. And again, box art these days can do that to an extent, but it's not the same as when you're a kid. And again, maybe it's a whole rose tinted glasses, the nostalgia drug, but it's something that I have to kind of give a shout out to, just being a kid and noticing these things.
You kind of want a box art to kind of grab you as much as the box wants you to grab it and take it off the shelf,
Right.
Like this woman, Gail Tilden was saying. I mean, she did go on to become the vice president of brand management.
Yes.
She went on to become vice president of brand management at Nintendo. But I disagreed with what she was saying in terms of style, bringing over the NES in the early 1990s.
The 80s.
Was it the...
Well, yeah, because they were talking about the original NES system.
That's right. They were. Here it is.
Famicom.
Getting a little bit... Yes, the Famicom. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves,
but yeah, just for viewers or listeners, I should say, Nintendo came out with a console in Japan called the Famicom, or the Family Computer System. That was what it was called, and Gail, I think, figured out that kind of naming the system that and bringing it to America in its current configuration with the white and the red, colors for the console itself may not work well with American audiences in terms of its color scheme. So that's why they worked for a while to revamp it, and it came out in that, I want to say, industrial gray with a red stripe design. And she did the focus group, she did the studies. All of it was probably her opinion, and figured that was probably what would grab Americans more, like that color scheme. And I'm not a marketer. I have no idea like how any of this works, but since she was the one hired, since she was the one that made the big bucks, I'm going to assume that she knew what she was talking about back in the early 80s.
I'm also going to lean towards that because, I mean, it worked. From what the episode told us, the marketing test site, New York City, the sales there were decent enough, but good enough to make nationwide sales. So it ultimately did, work toward their benefit, but it just seemed so strange because I feel like who we have become today, kind of, not reliant, but we have a factor of what we grew up with and what we're looking at now in terms of box art and what grabs us. It's mostly the things that they avoided in the early years. The Famicom was burgundy red, it was jagged, it had, as she described it, it was all things that weren't high-end electronic or family-friendly. But I think that the way that they took that and turned it into what became this gray box with a small little line of color was kind of what we accepted. But what we're doing now is turning the systems into what we kind of want them to be, more colorful. We're sticking stickers on them or
There's variety to
whatever
it
it
now.
is.
Like instead of just buying the regular PlayStation, or so actually, let's go back. Using Nintendo as an example, you have the Nintendo
Sure.
Switch. You can buy the base configuration, which has the red and the blue, Joy Cons that you would use, but you can customize it now to the colors you want. So now the customization is there to your heart's content, whereas back then you were kind of made to like this version. And again,
Right.
there's a component of psychology and there's a component of advertising to this. And I took one class of that in college, and so my knowledge in that is very limited. But in my opinion, was it something that was probably placed on us and made it seem like this is the way that we would like it? Definitely possible. And is it possible that we would have rejected the Famicon's color scheme if it had come to America in its form from Japan? Again, possible. But in any
Who
sense,
knows?
I found the history behind that's just very interesting, that part of the document with Gail. Like a woman that I'd never heard of before, working Nintendo, working its advertising, and, having the long meetings with people, figuring out what people would like, what they would gravitate, and what would sell for the system, for the game, and the magazine, which we'll get to in a second.
It's a jam-packed episode.
The other thing I wanted to say on Gail myself was, to her credit, figured that if it would work in a microcosm in terms of the rest of America, in New York City, then it would find success in the rest of America because New York City has a microcosm of many different races, people, ethnicities, religions. You can make it work there. Probably make it work elsewhere. I mean, again, rural America functions differently than the city, but my guess is if a kid in the city likes playing video games, I'm going to go on a leap of faith here and say a kid in the rural America likes playing video games as well back then. They want to go play something.
I'm also going to assume that as well. Hey, if you're a kid in rural America or a kid in a high-end, top-tier class apartment in New York City, if you're listening to this and you enjoy gaming, let us know.
We always like to see who's out there. But yeah, just
We
continuing
certainly
with that
do.
train of thought. One of the other things that Gail said, because going back to advertising, she said that placing in stores and places where people could see it helped too. And that's the thing. I think placing New York City's what helped it to ultimately succeed because you can put it in departments, you can put it in malls, you can put it in places where people walk by. Like if New York, generalizing, because I don't know what New York looked like in the mid 80s, but I'm guessing if you're a kid walking down like Fifth Avenue and maybe you see this huge Nintendo display with the NES and the game's demo gameplay just overly playing again. Oh my God, you're curious. You want to know what this is. So you ask mommy and daddy, can I go in? You play it, maybe a demo, or maybe you see gameplay of somebody else playing it, and now you have to play it. So again, a lot of good advertising, a lot of creativity there on her part to kind of put all the pieces together to make this a success. And I mean, it was a success, not in just the sales, but the fact that the system was a huge leap forward in terms of graphics, gameplay, and viability. Because you had the Atari systems of old, but you found a system that was even more popular, ended up in more homes, and if you had it, you were the most popular family on the block. When word of mouth just kind of took hold from there.
Everyone wanted to come over to Jimmy's house because Jimmy had the new NES.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, it took off, and it sort of shocked people of the time, especially since it was so soon compared to Atari's launch and fail, and not ultimately because of poor marketing or the game itself, but I think what occurred was that sort of dynamic shift in advertising. So yeah, maybe it was the marketing.
Yeah, again, simple oversimplification, but I think all that things happened in the right place at the right time and had the right team behind the scenes to make it so. And that's the thing and that's what I said at the beginning of this episode when I started is I knew a lot of these things, generally speaking, but I didn't know the greater details. Like, definitely didn't know who Gail was. Definitely didn't know about the small test release in New York City. And I didn't know about the research that went behind the scenes to craft the console, to make it different from its Japanese counterparts, how it would relate to Americans, like, all new to me. So I'm happy to learn this information. I feel much more knowledgeable, but I also feel a little more complete knowing my gaming history. Because as a kid, you learn what you played as a kid. You never know what went into making that thing possible.
That's something that we also tend to overlook a lot. As gamers, we kind of, get the brunt end of the sword when it comes to the age-old question. When you're growing up, hey Tim, what are you doing? Oh, I'm playing GoldenEye, or hey, I'm playing Pokemon, and it's just like, ugh, he's playing video games. But when you really take the time to look into how many people were involved and how many job opportunities sprang up because of this, I mean, in the episode, we got to meet a very wonderful individual by the name of Sean
Bloom.
Thank you. I'm looking for his name. Sean Bloom.
Great character. He was a job type that doesn't exist anymore. He was a game counselor. And Tim, I definitely want you to explain this one, but from what I have here in my notes, basically that what I have of it is games were very tough back then, and Nintendo wanted you to buy more of them. So game counselors were made so that way they could help you beat it.
From the notes that I gathered on this individual, because first of all, the mullet. He had a mullet when he was an actual game counselor, and they gave him a wig, and I loved that they gave him a wig. But yes, there was apparently a system of Nintendo game counselors that were hired in local areas because people who bought the games played the games, but there are things about the games that at the time, the only way to learn it was to master the game. We sort of have an understanding of mastering a game now because we have, achievements, a list of objectives, goals. When we pause the game menu, we have 89 or 87% complete out of 100, and we don't know things about it. But individuals were hired by a company, Nintendo in this case, to play the games, to create essentially your own strat guide, to take calls. These were kids coming out of high school looking for a summertime job, and hey, in the early to mid 80s, you could get a job playing games all day.
I mean, if that didn't sound amazing to a random kid in the 80s coming out of high school, I don't know what would.
It almost sounds fantastic.
Exactly. On the surface, it sounds great. In many ways, it was great. But Sean explains in the documentary, it was tough because, so today you have YouTube bailing you out if you get stuck in a game. Back then you didn't. You called these guys. But Sean said that in the episode, and this is kind of crazy, that the games weren't released in advance for these guys. The games were released at the same time, so you had to play them as soon as possible, beat them, master them, and learn the ins and outs of them, because you would have people calling you on the phone within a day or two asking, hey, I'm stuck on this one part in Castlevania. How do I beat it? Where do I go for these secrets? I keep dying on this boss. Tell me how to beat him. It's a stark difference from today. Playing video games for work, but you also had to know your shit, basically, to help these kids. And some of the guidebooks that Sean had to refer to get these kids through some of these parts were insane. Like the amount of pages, the amount of memorization. And it got harder and harder as more games were released over the course of his job, and then, of course, over the life of these game counselors. Because I think these game counselors, it didn't say in the episode, but I think these game counselors existed until maybe the mid-90s. And then the job kind of dropped off at that point, because I think game guides started to become more common. And then maybe Nintendo at that point was successful and they didn't need to pay these game guides, because the idea was these counselors would help kids beat the game. The quicker they beat the game, the quicker they are to go tell mommy and daddy, I want a new game, and continue it all over again.
Oh, yeah. And you're right about that, is that the game counselors were, a short-lived job. But it did go away when magazines, company-developed strategy guides for the game started to come. Because you didn't need to call these people to learn the games. You could just buy the game and the strat guide.
Right.
These people actually hand-drew strategy guides based off of what they were told, what they watched when they played, and the questions that people were asking them. And they were enormous binders, like you were saying. Just these enormous things, pages they had to swift through. To anyone out there who really thought when they first heard this, oh my god, it was such an easy gig to do. I'll just play the games and I'll tell people to piss off because they're a noob. I mean, you can do that now, you won't get paid, but it was actual work. A lot of work. Binders like those usually hold financial records, estate documents, receipts, filings, deals, whatever. It holds the same amount of work. You have to put the work in to build that binder. And those binders were fat.
Thick with like 4 C's.
Yeah, I just want to say to anyone out there who doesn't think that there's a lot of work going into playing games or to teach people to play games, please check this episode out. Honestly, it's a lot of work. It really is.
Definitely. On the same note of Sean Bloom, people that play games, the other guy I talked about in this episode, Jeff Hansen, I loved his story. He talked about something that doesn't exist anymore in the same way. It was Nintendo had this Power Fest tour in 1990 to showcase new games and products across different cities in a big competition. And the prize, just to give you context, the prize was huge for back then. A $10,000 savings bond, a convertible car, a big screen TV, which probably weighs as much of a house now from the ones back then, and a Universal Studios Hollywood trip. The thing that every kid back in the 80s and 90s wanted, that was always advertised on all these game shows or whatever that people watched. And the cartridge for the game competition that Jeff played had Super Mario Brothers, Rad Racer, and Tetris, and he played these games. He was great at them. He played a competition in Salt Lake City at first, and he got third place, but then he tried again. He got better at Tetris. He gave it to his parents, hey, let's go try again. I want to go play again, and they did it again at Tampa, and in that time, he played, perfected the games. Tetris, he was a master at it, and he got the high score and ended up, winning the whole thing. It was amazing just for him, just being that kid and winning that. And again, I said this before about the first episode, but you had that competition in LA in 1980 in the first episode, and this is 10 years later. Again, these are all precursors of the esports scene that you have today, where it's a big deal, money's being involved, but it was different back then because it was a hot new thing. Today I feel like there's a lot of like gamer bro culture with those sort of esports things, and for better for worse, take it how you will, but that's just at least the impression it looks like to me, because I'm also way too old for that kind of stuff. Like, I'm 31 years old, but I'm considered a dinosaur if I were to go try and play esports. I just don't have the reflexes. But anyway, neither here nor there. Back then, it was a lot more, because I don't have a better way to describe it, more pure. Like, you had kids just genuinely excited to go play games, get the high score, and have a good time, and win prizes along the way. Whereas these days, I feel like it's just purely, our Call of Duty team has to win, so that way we can, win the prizes and get the fame, and I'm trying to think of the street cred, basically.
Essentially, yeah. The points, the cred, whatever you kids are saying these days. I also, that's what I also really enjoyed about his story, was because he says it in the episode. They didn't realize that he was a gifted game player until they went to the competition. And then when they saw, both him and his parents, when they saw that he placed third, he dedicated himself to improve himself. He wanted to get better at the game. Fun fact, third place, he won third place at the Salt Lake City competition, which his prize for third place was a Game Boy and the game Tetris. Perfect for him, because that's the game that he was weakest in. He had the less time playing. So it seemed to just work in his favor. And the dedication and encouragement that his parents gave to him, in my opinion, really helped propel the drive in himself to get it accomplished. When we're in a competition, we all kind of believe we're going to win. We tell ourselves we have to win. We tell ourselves we should win. But I feel like because everything was kind of propping this young man up, he actually said to himself, I'm going to win, as opposed to I could win, I want to win. I'm going to win. And to see him to work as hard as he did to succeed, it was a very heartwarming moment. It's one of those rare times in film where you see you see the guy you're rooting for win.
You see it in so many movie plots, but this is no movie. This happened, and this kid worked hard for it and made it.
One of the things about that competition that was kind of interesting to me, and I found it really interesting just because of where I sit on the side, it was hosted at Universal Studios, and competition actually had a chance of never happening due to a little conflict between Nintendo's most recent release, Donkey Kong, and a property of Universal that sued Nintendo based off of its similarity to King Kong. And it's funny enough, when I sat down to watch this episode, I literally said to myself, wouldn't it be interesting if they brought up the fact that Donkey Kong is an homage to King Kong? And what do you know? It was a hot button issue for the episode. Universal owned the rights to King Kong, and before they did the tournament with Nintendo, I think it was 1990, they were in a lawsuit.
Yeah, it's just because I think Donkey Kong came out in 1983, so this is a whole 7 years prior to that. So there's that whole mess of litigation, court stuff to kind of sort through. And Shigeru Miyamoto, been at Nintendo since 1977. He created Mario in Donkey Kong as Jumpman before being named Mario. And when he created Donkey Kong, as you were saying, there was a whole issue with copyright that they thought they were just straight up just stealing King Kong and putting it in their game and trying to make money off it. So he hires the best, John Kirby, who you folks might recognize that name.
The man. What happened was a lawyer by the name of John Kirby went over to Japan to investigate and interview Nintendo employees about the creation of this character. And what they found was that it's a synonymous representation between King Kong and gorilla. So when someone in Japan wants to advertise a big gorilla sale, or a sale that is so large it is massive like a big gorilla, they refer to that as King Kong. A King Kong savings, a King Kong car wash, a King Kong whatever. Considering that Universal doesn't have the rights to synonyms, and they only have the rights to specifically King Kong and the representation of King Kong, the wonderful John Kirby convinced the judge that there was no copyright infringement, and his legacy will live on to this day.
And forever. His name is literally a character. I learned this at the very end of the episode, which was unfortunate. But he died last year, and this whole episode was dedicated to him.
God rest his soul.
He will forever be immortalized because of what he did for Nintendo, and it's because of what he did that Nintendo is still here in the US doing what they do.
We have a wonderful, inflatable character, lovable character, inspired by him. I mean, to create, it's wonderful to have the history of your company manifested in characters that you go on to, sell and profit off of and become notorious or infamous. Kirby, the character, is a piece of Nintendo history, and it is actually based off of a man named Kirby.
And we're very thankful for him for his contributions, because it's because of him, his contributions, like not just the games, but the system, anything Nintendo related. I mean, Nintendo Power, which that's the last thing I kind of wanted to mention with this episode, because it was such a, I think it's the term, hopefully I'm using this term correctly, magnum opus for Nintendo. I mean, it's one thing to have the game, the console, but you need a piece of print, because it was huge back then, to kind of tie it all together, make people read it and go, I need to have that game, or this is how you beat this game. This helps to kind of wrap everything together. And it's a magazine that's not made anymore. Well, I think the last issue came out a few years ago, and I was kind of bummed about that, because I never really read the magazine that much when I was a kid, because we didn't have a subscription to it, but I knew of it. I knew its significance, what it was capable of, and they released it in 1988 for those gamers who were stuck on hot new releases or just wanted to know about what was coming up. And it said that the Nintendo president here in America was inspired by the mangas from Japan and other video game magazines in Japan, and thought about how something similar could be here for the US players. And good thing he had that idea, because, like I said, a brand new medium to expose to people, to make them interested in and excited for the hot new things coming up.
And I agree. It was sort of that magnum opus, kind of the cherry on top, It was the thing that really solidified and helped stabilize video games. And I think it was the one thing that was sort of different from the Atari release. It didn't have the same type of recognition, People were playing games, and there was still debate of whether it's more cost effective to go to arcades or to buy the system at home. And then what if they get stuck in a game and now they're stuck and they can't play it anymore? With that having gone through its history, and Nintendo picking up later and contributing and listening and kind of receiving feedback from two, hot markets where their products are doing well. It seemed like everything kind of came together to take chances, and they paid off. I remember reading Nintendo Power when I was growing up. I liked the Pokemon Center, and that was the place where all the Pokemon updates were, but there were also the tips and tricks for GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, the Zelda games. They had all of the maps where you can find things,
Oh, yes.
but they also told you about events.
Yeah, it was a lot of stuff to get excited about. And like I said, not just the games, not just the consoles, but so many other nuances that were related to the games. They were in this magazine for people to read and to consume. And Gail Tilden, who we talked about earlier, teamed up with her friend Howard Phillips to go to pitch this to the Boston Japan to make this happen. And she said, or alluded to in the episode, that making Americanized was tricky because the art style, fonts, and whatnot had to be changed, and persisted and included things in the magazine like top 10 lists and helpful tips in the magazine to make it a complete package through and through. And she was a part of the cover. If you guys go look at the first cover for Nintendo Power, it has Mario on it. But to that point, there had never been a 3D image of Mario ever. So she used, with the help of others, claymation to kind of give Mario a 3D perspective for the first time ever. And if you look on there, it's claymation that did that. And if you want to, guys, go get it on eBay. So just for the record, I looked to see how much it would cost to get the first issue. If you want it in good condition, people are selling it for about $500 on eBay. And if you want it in crappy but still holding it together condition, it's still about $100. So my advice to you for Nintendo fans, but if you want a piece of history from the late 80s, I would go hunt for it sooner rather than later.
That sounds like it. The oh my god, I didn't even think to look at it, because in the episode she just said, it printed 32 million copies. So if you want to eBay it, everyone has it. But it's true, like it's roughly 30 years old. So it would be considered vintage.
Well, yeah. Oh no, it's older than us. So totally. I mean, it's vintage. It's not made anymore. The magazine's out of print. But she did say that was the magazine that was printed the most in its history. I think she said 2.2 million copies. So, like I said, Nintendo's always had a special place in my heart since I was a kid, and my brother too. I mean, we had a Sega first because of the story I told you back in episode 1 and 2. I'll definitely try and get a copy for myself, and I'll probably try and frame it because that's a piece of history. That's something you can't get anymore, at least not easily. So I definitely want to get a piece of that history.
I certainly have enough pieces in terms of Pokemon, but yeah, that definitely is something that will go into a museum. I certainly imagine it to have a story. I mean, the story is told in the episode, but I also felt like it was really interesting to see that was the first 3D model of Mario.
I know we take it for granted because you can play him in a 3D game. Like for us, we have the Mario Galaxy, Mario 64. We have the 3D images from like the Super Nintendo games, but that's the thing. Back in the 80s, there was only 2D Marios. That was a first. And again, another thing we take for granted, but it's such a simple thing. But
there certainly is a lot to unpackage with this documentary, and I'm glad that it's on an easy to follow platform, Netflix. It's just going to be a goldmine as we keep going into this series. The more we learn, the more we're going to be sharp when we talk about video games. It's no more of this, slow, droll, we're having fun and all of this. We're actually looking into the systems, the market, the individuals in depth with this. It is going to be, a topic of wise conversation.
And we definitely want to keep getting better and improving our knowledge and try and deliver something good for you guys. And just to tie off the episode as a whole, before we wrap up, again, another great episode. Average gamer who had Nintendo growing up might know some of this stuff, but the episode did a great job digging into the specifics and the legacy impacts Nintendo had. So if you're any bit a Nintendo fan, or even just retro gamer, or video gamer for that matter, you'll feel at home with this. Again, just like the first episode, go watch it. I'm definitely eager to see episode 3. It looks like it has to do with role-playing games, just the way this one ended. So, with that end, I am very excited to see the next episode and see where this keeps going, because I don't watch them all in one go personally. I usually watch them maybe a couple days before, so that kind of get that knowledge. So I've not seen the whole series. This is a trip, and I'm taking you guys all with me for the first time. So this is about as new to you as it is to me.
Oh, same here, buddy. I looked at the couple of first 3 episodes when we started doing this podcast, but I fell asleep in the second and third episode, so I needed to refresh my mind. So going into this third episode, yeah, it's going to be fresh knowledge to talk about and share with you guys. And I hope that everyone listening was also participating in this little trip with us as well. And if you are, don't forget to follow and subscribe and let us know in the comments below.
And if you like us, please give us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts. It helps us greatly. And to that, thank you very much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time for the episode 3.
Take it easy, players.